this week, I was riding my bicycle down to Grace when I passed a young man smoking a cigarette. He was sitting beside a large truck, the sort of truck that you might use for, I don't know what, plumbing emergencies or trimming trees. And I deduced that he was the truck's driver. He was wearing something that looked like a uniform, and there was something about his manner that said, "This is my truck." And just as I went past on the bike, he finished smoking his cigarette and started walking towards the door of the truck. I don't know if he realized that I was there at the moment that was in any way witnessed, because I got past him. He got to the door of the truck, and to the door, or to the world, or to himself, he said, "Ah!" I don't know why. I don't know if he realized that he'd locked himself out of the cab, if he had realized that he had left an important tool at home that he needed, if he just remembered some conversation that happened hours ago or years ago when someone said something unkind to him and he said something unkind back and they don't talk anymore. If he remembered who he dreamt of being when he was young. When a number of years ago, I knew a child who was a screamer. He was 4 or 5 years old, and these were not incidental screams. They were seismic, Richter scale screams that would cut through reality. And his parents and his siblings lived in fear of these screams starting up. And one day this child, in a moment of clarity or self-awareness, the child was with someone whom they loved and trusted. They felt safe, and this person said to them, "Why do you scream?" And the child said, "I don't know what else to do." And I wonder if the young man screaming at the door of his truck, if he were with someone whom he loved and trusted and where he felt safe, might have said the same thing. "I'm screaming at the door of my truck because I don't know what else to do." I wonder if you or I might say the same thing if we were with someone whom we loved and trusted and where we felt safe. Because in many ways, a guy standing in the street screaming at the door of a truck feels like an icon for the moment that we are living in. So many folks are so anxious, so exhausted, so filled with grief, so overwhelmed, so filled with anger. To watch TV or to go onto Twitter is to have bad news and outrage mainlined into your arm. Pollsters don't say that Americans today don't agree on much, but left and right both readily agree with the statement, "I don't recognize my country anymore." To live in Portland, to live indoors in Portland, I think most of this crowd this morning lives indoors, is to continually be faced with the dissonance of, as you're going to school or work or church or just taking the dog for a walk, going past destitution. Not poverty. Poverty may be of some kind of spiritual value. Destitution is just rotten. It is of no value whatsoever. A friend of mine visited town from Seattle a while back, and she went on a big walk in Portland and talked about this dissonance. She talked about walking past folks living in tents, living in desperation, living with searching for the basic necessities of life, and then sometimes not even half a block later, encountering a lawn sign that said, "In our America, love wins." What do you do? What do you do with this dissonance? It's all too much. Of course you want to scream. And we're not immune to any of this within the walls of a church. None of this anxiety or exhaustion or overwhelm or grief or anger stops at these doors. I talk regularly with priests across the country, and what all of them say is that there's a level of hurt in their people that they have never seen or have not seen in years. Dan and I have a friend who's been in his place for 14 years, so twice as long as I've been at Grace. And he shared with me recently that last month, for the first time in his career, somebody stormed out of a meeting. Somebody got up and said, I've had enough, and slammed the door. They couldn't take it anymore. This is an icon for where we're at, standing outside the truck, going, If that's right, if that is a symbol for where we are at the moment, what does that mean for what we're doing today in church? What does it mean for church broadly? But in particular, what does it mean for this day? This is a day on which we are celebrating baptism. Later on, Zavi and Genevieve will be baptized. This is the Sunday after All Souls, All Saints. So we're going to be reading the names of people whom we love and see no more. And this is a day on which we are going to make the promises of baptism or reaffirm the promises of baptism, including the promise that we are going to respect the dignity of every human being. What does that mean? What might these things mean? Here's a few wonderings, not an exhaustive list, but a few wonderings. What this day means is that we are called by God, invited by God to take on the burden of hope. Hope, I want to suggest to you, is a burden, because if we let go of hope, if we say there is no hope at all, the future is going to look like irretrievable ecological catastrophe. It's going to look like nuclear annihilation. It's going to look like civil war. What other fears could we add to the list? Then we are absolved of having to do anything. It's hopeless. So there's no reason to do anything. We can focus our energies on drinking heavily, right? We can focus our energies on eating cake and watching TV and taking care of ourselves and not worrying about anyone or anything else. We're free in that scenario. If Elon Musk is right, and this, what we're in right now, isn't the base reality, if we're actually in a video game at the moment, then it doesn't matter that there are people sleeping on the streets, because at some point the video game's just going to be turned off and they'll go back to whatever they're doing. If the rapture is about to come and God is about to turn the video game off, it doesn't matter either, right? Everything's going to be fixed in very short order. We need not, I suppose in the rapture scenario, you need to have hope getting into heaven, but you certainly don't need any hope about this world right now. Maybe what we're declaring as we head out into the waters of baptism, some of the water coming from God's sky, some of them gathered in a holy pool, we're declaring that God is not somewhere else, that God is at work, that God is still speaking, and in the famous words of Teresa of Avila, or Avila, I'm double clutch. It's either one. They're either legit. Thank you, Dan. And is like a fact checker sitting in the front row. In Teresa's famous words, now Christ now has no hands but ours and no feet but ours. To take on the burden of hope is to take on the responsibility. Oh, I see. You know what's happening. I'm running low on battery. Should I switch to the hand? Yeah. Here I am. Begin. feet. Thank you, Evelyn. Uh, that's a call that we're invited to take on. We're allowed to scream, but we're not allowed to give our hearts to that scream. It's the burden of hope. So that is maybe tough news or daunting news in a moment like this. So let's add some good news to it. And that is one of the things that we are declaring today is that we don't have to take on the burden of hope by ourselves. It's something that happens in community, in a place like this, in a place like church. I was visiting with somebody, I think the week before last, not someone affiliated with the church, but someone sometimes happens, someone who's curious about church. And our conversation went through a lot of subjects. And partway through the conversation, the person I was visiting with shared sort of a modern spiritual aphorism. And I hope I can say this without sounding too judgy or uncharitable, but it sounded to me a lot like self-help, what they shared. And what they said was, I've come to realize that I have everything I need within me. And clearly to this person, this felt like good news. I'm glad that it felt like good news to this person. I confess to you, friends, it didn't sound like good news to me at all, because I don't have everything I need within me, not even close. And if I'm supposed to have everything that I need within me, I am failing and failing badly this life. I need everyone in order to be alive, in order to function, in order to follow Jesus. Ringo was right all those years ago. We do get by, but only with a little help from our friends. The sermon would have derailed if Evelyn hadn't told me where I was supposed to resume. Sometimes you'll hear the question, why do we baptize children? Why do we baptize children when we should wait until they're adults and they can understand what they are doing? Well, first, I'm an adult and I don't understand baptism. I am an adult and I do not understand the Eucharist. I trust that God is at work in baptism and in the Eucharist. I've witnessed God at work in baptism and the Eucharist, but understand, not even close. I'm not even close to understanding these things. So if we're waiting for understanding, we're going to wait the rest of our lives. But more than that, what we're declaring when we baptize a child is that what we're doing here in church is not still another example of individualism, still another example of consumerism, where it's up to you and you alone to figure out life and figure out love and figure out being a good person and figure out following God and what are the other great questions of life. You're on your own to do that. And what you're doing when you're coming here is sort of like what you're doing when you go to the coffee shop or log on to Amazon. You are purchasing a product that helps you as an individual consumer. And if what you purchase here is not to your liking, if the church paints the walls the wrong color or puts the furniture in the wrong place or sings the wrong hymns, you're free to just take your business somewhere else. You're free, like Paul, to say, I have no need of you. You are to reverse John Donne. You are an island. You're on your own. And what we're declaring as we baptize in community is maybe that's not what church is. Maybe we are called to do something together. We are responsible for one another. We are our brother's keeper and sister's keeper and siblings' keeper. What we're going to be declaring in baptism is that together we are responsible for nurturing Zavi and Genevieve in faith. They in turn are responsible for nurturing us in faith. We are responsible to one another for saying yes to Jesus, for carrying the burden of hope. We have a duty, to use an old-fashioned and kind of unfashionable word. We have a duty to one another, even when it's hard, possibly especially when it's hard, especially when it's difficult, especially when it's disappointing. When we keep on showing up in that, that is when church happens. We're not alone in doing this work, not alone because of the people gathered here, and maybe we're going to read the necrology later, the list of people whom we love and see no more. Dare we hope as well that we're not alone because we are accompanied by people across time. What's the word, the phrase from the epistle to Ephesians? Goodness, Dan, apparently I'm just looking to you repeatedly. Like, okay, I've completely forgotten what I'm supposed to be. What am I supposed to be saying? It is Ephesians, right? Where so great a cloud of witnesses. We are accompanied by people across space and across time. We're not alone in taking on the burden of hope. One more. What we're declaring here in church, and in particular as we affirm the baptismal promise of respecting the dignity of every human being, is that we see the face of God shining in one another. Again, even when it's hard, even when it's disappointing. We've talked before, I think, about Brene Brown's practice of assuming that people are doing their best. It's a little different than assuming that people have good intentions. It's assuming that folks are, even when they're behaving badly, or doing the best they can. So whoever defaced the sign, the church sign, and on it with Sharpie, they were doing their best in that moment. Who tore the pride flag off the building was doing their best. That person who yells at you in traffic is doing their best. The person who sends you the accusatory, angry email, like, maybe they're doing their best. This is a hard one. Brown talks about speaking with her husband and saying, like, do you really believe that? And he thinks about it for a long time and says, I'm not sure, but I know that life gets easier when I do. And at a minimum, that's what this practice gives us. To decide the person who shouts at you in traffic is doing their best, if absolutely nothing else, it may lower your blood pressure. That is my experience with it. But I think more than that, this practice invites you to see the dignity in other human beings, and perhaps, if you allow yourself to tell that story about yourself, to see the dignity in yourself. Every human being, by necessity, includes you. Experience with this practice is that far from it being a doormat theology, where assuming someone is doing their best means I'm suddenly okay with being abused or maltreated, that actually the opposite happens. By making that assumption, by holding on to that maxim, I'm actually free from engaging in storytelling about what's happening inside their head or in their heart. I no longer need to say, you clearly hate me, you clearly don't respect me, you clearly, who knows what other stories we might, that thing you did on purpose. We're now actually freed. One of the things we learn, you may have learned if you've done any anti-racism training, is to focus on impact rather than intention. And one of the things that declaring that folks are doing their best frees us up to do is to focus on that impact. That thing did hurt. When you did that thing, I felt sad or lost or confused, I felt disappointed. A few minutes ago, I told you about the man screaming at the truck, the young man screaming at the truck. And memory is funny because I said to you that what he shouted out of the door was, "Gah!" But now that I'm thinking about it again, I wonder if he actually didn't shout something different. I wonder if what he didn't shout, in fact, was God. And if that's right, if that's what he yelled out at the car door, then what I may have heard on that day was a prayer. Is there a prayer more raw and direct and powerful then when you are lost and angry and searching, then shouting out God's name. God! Like that is a real prayer, a prayer that comes out of the Psalms, where this full anger and searching and lostness finds its expression. If that's right, if this young man was praying on that day, if you or I offer a similar prayer, then maybe God has good news for us. Maybe some of what we've been wondering about this morning might be part of what God wants to share with us. Maybe God wants us to know we are called to take on the burden of hope. Maybe God wants us to know that we don't have to take on that burden alone. There's a church, a community, a cloud of witnesses who is ready to take on that burden with us. And maybe God wants us to know that we are invited to see dignity in one another and in ourselves. In spite of our exhaustion and overwhelm and grief and anger and searching, maybe God wants us to see the face of God shining in one another, shining in creation.